Hi, it's Cheryl Durst, and I am very honored to be joined by one of our newest fellows, Ronnie Belizaire, FIIDA. Ronnie is a corporate real estate manager with Daimler. And Ronnie, I'm going to tell you some things about yourself. And you were accorded this particular honor because of your impressive career and your continuous service to IIDA. You have an extensive and impressive project portfolio, and you really are right now at this forefront of corporate real estate and workplace design. Ronnie is currently a leader on our international board of directors. She is our president-elect. And you've leveraged and used your voice and your leadership platform to advocate for justice and equity and equality. And you've led some impactful conversations. You've been revelatory for so many in our industry. And your entire IIDA career has been a lesson in leadership. You were a leader as a student. You led IIDA's Georgia chapter, and now you're a leader on the international board. And I'm grateful for your leadership and your friendship. So let's talk a little bit about Ronnie. Why don't we start with tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, how you found design, and what's your personal story? We want your origin story.
My origin story, I feel so important when you use those words. But, so I am the youngest of three daughters to Haitian immigrant parents. I'm the first one in my immediate family actually born in the US, which I think not really understanding that when I was younger was probably a good thing, because I just thought everyone's households were made up that same way, speak two languages are spoken in the household every day, got, aunts and uncles and grandparents in another country. I just thought that was like normal. And I don't think it was until I got to college that I really understood how maybe that actually isn't everybody else's experience. All of a sudden, my really diverse, ethnically diverse bringing up in South Florida, all of a sudden became very black and white once I got to college. And I didn't really understand that it's probably took me a year of being in college to really grasp how different my upbringing was. But I can say my upbringing is what caused a level of curiosity, because it allowed me to just forever consider everyone has this story of something interesting behind how they got to where they are, because I have one. My parents immigrated to this country. I am truly the product of them reuniting in the United States. I don't think they planned for me. I just popped up after they hadn't seen each other for 10 months. And all of a sudden they're reunited. So I have that beautiful, colorful story of how I came to be as part of my family, and knowing the sacrifices that my parents made along the way when they were much younger than I am right now. They were 26 and 30 when I was born. I'm the third child. They came to a country where they didn't speak the language and figured out a way to raise a family here. And I just continuously look back at that, because that level of sacrifice and that level of sheer determination to do something better, create something better for their children that they themselves didn't necessarily have, is just kind of a legacy that I have to continuously hold on to and fight for because of what they did. So that's my origin story, per se. And how did that roll into design? Well, first of all, I had never even thought about design as a career. I thought I was first going to be an obstetrician, because I saw what Bill Cosby did on The Cosby Show. And it was a very logical thought at 10 years old. People are always going to have babies. I'll always have a job. So I'm going to be an obstetrician. Very logical. Then I realized I hated biology when I got to high school.
That could have been a problem.
That's the problem. I enjoyed anatomy, but I didn't really care for biology. By the time I got to 3 biology classes in high school, I said, what am I doing? I don't really care for this. And I had to kind of pivot and figure out what it is that I wanted to do. So then my next thing is I'm good with math. So I could just go into business and like be an accountant. Why not? Because I'm good with math. Once again, I was just going through the easy route and logical route of things versus what am I passionate about? And after a very arduous internship with PricewaterhouseCoopers, I said, you know what? This is not my life. I can't do,
Wow.
I can do it, but this is not really what I wanted to do. And in the early stages of Google, I literally just Googled aptitude test. And eventually I took 5 aptitude tests. 3 of the 5 told me best career for me is interior design. And I'm thinking as a 22-year-old, I don't want to decorate people's houses because that's what I understood design to be.
That was your first thought of design. Yeah.
First thought. And then with the 3, I said, well, if there's something to what I'm answering that's creating this as a #1 career option for me. So I did cold calls to designers. You guys, whoever you are in the world that I called, some of you hung up on me, some of you didn't pick up, some of you picked up, and 2 of you actually talked to me. And I must say those 2 conversations, one was with Sheila Bridges, who's a very well-known designer. I think she's still based out of New York. I'm not 100% sure.
She is.
And Roderick Shades. And ironically, both are designers of color who actually took the time to actually have conversations with me. And I said, well, I think I might be able to do this. How do I do this? And then did the research and found out I had to go back and get a degree. And said, no, too much work.
So you were out of undergrad at that point.
I was getting my MBA. I was in the midst of my MBA. And good news is my MBA was going to be up within 6 months of when I started this research. I was going to be done with my MBA. And it was just in time for me to determine, okay, I have to go back to school. And I was in school in Tallahassee at the time. Florida State had a really good design program. They were a state school. No one was going to pay for this but me at this point. So ended up applying to Florida State, gave them, I don't know, the silliest response to why I want to be a designer. And somehow they said, okay, we accept you and you can start in January. And I was graduating with my MBA in December 2004 and started January 2005 at FSU. Like,
wow.
I'm like, it must have been meant for me to do this. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's such a, I don't think I knew all of that detail in your origin story. And I love that you cold called, that you reached out to designers with the intent of asking them, you know, what is this really like? And so in the course of it, because you approached it very methodically and logically, right? So you definitely are one of those left brain, right brain, right? And you're a, you know, you've got a design degree and your MBA. Where did you find the passion for design? I can definitely see the strategy and the logic, but I also know you're very passionate about the work that you do. Where did you find the passion for design?
I would actually say it was during the process of doing my thesis for my master's of interior design from FSU. When I started, it's like, okay, I just need to get all the information I can get about design. I'm going to be the best student I could be. And, you know, within, I think the first month of me being there, we had to start to kind of determine what our thesis was going to be. And we need to at least submit topics for review from our graduate student advisor. And I just literally kept going back to the human aspect of design and how humanity can be like helped by design. And so eventually I ended up with what ended up being something that was more so an urban design and urban planning thesis versus interior design. But I found a way to weave all that together. But essentially my topic was urban revitalization's exclusion of the homeless. And I don't even know how I came up with the ability to find a way to weave interior design into that story, but I did, and it was well received. And I ended up presenting to IIDA, I think at some point. I think it was right before I graduated because the subject matter was so different. at that particular point in time than what anybody else was writing a thesis in interior design for. So during that process of doing that research, I just kept getting to that aspect of this work could really help people. And how do I find a way to make money doing it, but also helping people? And that's been kind of the juxtaposition of my career, is the altruistic side of me and the capitalist side of me wanting to find a way to make the two marry. Not always the easy balance, but every so often I'm able to find a way to like weave these two things together.
Well, that's good. You allow them to coexist, and that's always good. In that early part of your career, and you kind of made this pivot, were you supported by your family, by your parents, in this decision to move into design?
My parents had no idea what design was whatsoever. They're Haitian immigrants. They know you could be a teacher, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor. And then they kind of understood accounting because they understood you took care of people's money, but then that meant you were going to make money. So they were totally supportive of that. And then when I came to them and I said, I think I want to do design, they were like, what is design? And it was like architecture, but for the inside. I'm trying to, because in Haitian world, interior design does not exist. Architecture does. They can understand that. But even that to them is a rich person's thing. What do you need architecture? Only rich people do that. But my dad said something very poignant to me at the time in his wonderful accent that just makes me feel so warm inside as I'm thinking about it. He goes, I don't really know what design is, but I know you. And you will do whatever it is that you want in the world. And I remember that moment so much of me. I'm a 23-year-old, like getting that from my dad at that point in time. And it was just, I'm tearing up because that's my dad. I love him so much.
That's a beautiful story. And having that support, we've had conversations often amongst immigrant communities and communities of color, that is critical for so many of our students to understand that part and parcel of embracing a career in design is being able to share with your parents and family members why it's critical to you, why it's critical to the world. But that's often the first opportunity that students have to explain design, because you'll spend the rest of your career explaining design. And if you can explain it, we said, if you can explain it to your mother, you can explain it to anybody. But having that support is so important.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm beyond lucky. And then my older sisters, not that they really understood interior design either. They thought, oh, okay, she's going to decorate people's houses. That was their understanding too. But I remember my middle sister, I had to go home, I needed to go visit her in the middle of like doing a really big project as a student at FSU. And I brought the project with me. It was like her and her husband had just bought a house, and it was like their big, like, coming out with the house. And so I'm like, well, I'm driving with all my stuff because I got this project to work on. And she made me present it to all the people who came to her housewarming. And that was kind of like my first time presenting to a group that wasn't a group of students or professors. It was kind of like, and they all got it. And I was like, I'm doing something right. They understood what I was talking about. But yeah, that moment was a good one because it forced me to explain the theory, the thought process behind everything what I was doing to people who otherwise don't know.
Yeah, that was a critical skill, and good for her for pushing you a bit.
Yeah.
So you found design, and then you also found IIDA. And so let's talk a little bit about your relationship with IIDA and how you found the organization and what it's meant to your career.
Mm-hmm. So at Florida State, there was a student, it was a mixed student chapter. It was both IIDA or design organization, both IIDA and ASID at the time. And I just remember, someone saying, hey, and I looked at the two online, not that I knew truly the difference between either one, but I looked at both online, and I literally picked IIDA because I thought the website was better than the other website at the time. Good news is it worked out, but that was a really bad reason to pick an organization, but it ended up working out. And there was a student portfolio review that at the time, it was one Florida chapter. It wasn't broken up into the 3 different chapters that exist within the state of Florida now. And I remember it was back home in Fort Lauderdale at Dakota, and ended up like driving down and getting my portfolio reviewed, and just remembering these professionals really spent like a lot of time trying to help us, whether it's organizing the event, then actually getting professionals to go through your portfolio with you. I was really impressed by that. And in that moment, I said, well, I need to somehow get involved. And right out of school, once I graduated, I ended up starting a job in South Florida. And I just went to IIDA events at that point. I can't say that I was active. I can't say that I was trying to be super involved. I was trying to figure out my job at the time because I'm like, wait, I'm doing this thing that I was so passionate about, and I don't know what the first thing I'm doing yet. But it was honest, and I think the fashion show that South Florida had was probably the first time that I really started interacting with other designers outside of my own firm during that event. And from then on, I understood the networking ability or power of IIDA, and which then led me to be able to say, oh, this worked for me in South Florida. So when I got laid off and made a decision to move to Georgia, it was easy for me to make the conscious decision, let me somehow tap into IIDA Georgia. And then it's kind of all she wrote, kind of just all compounded into what I'm doing now for IIDA. But
well, when you made that shift, right, you found your community through IIDA. So moving to a new state, to a new city, you were able to make that connection through IIDA. What does community mean to you? I mean, and the next follow-up question is going to be, what does membership mean to you? But let's start with community, particularly now in this moment that we're living through, and as a leader on the international board. What does community, and specifically the IIDA community, mean to you?
Yeah, community really to me means it's almost like synonymous to home for me, right? This place that you can go and reset. And IIDA, out of IIDA, I've created this community of being able to reset, whether it's when I switch jobs, resetting with people who are part of IIDA in that job. When I made a move to Michigan and I didn't know anyone, it was kind of resetting with, oh, I know I have this extended community. Let me kind of tap into that somehow. And so community is a space that feels like home. And IIDA has truly given me that over the past 11 years, particularly. First, when I moved to Georgia, then I moved to Michigan, then I moved back to Georgia. And guess what? My IIDA community has still been surrounding me throughout the whole time.
Oh, I love that. It's been consistent for you. You've talked a little bit about your history with IIDA, and you were a chapter leader. So you led the Georgia chapter at a pretty interesting time in the economy and in the city of Atlanta. Let's talk a little bit about what it was like for you being a chapter leader.
So once again, I loved IIDA and I wanted to be involved in IIDA. There's no part of me that saw being a chapter president as part of that legacy at all. When I commit to doing something, I do it. I got involved on the Georgia chapter board because someone I met at a networking event said, hey, we have some board positions that need to be filled. You said you're interested. Do you want to fill a position? And then I remember, this is bad, but I said, which one has been vacant the longest? Because that's the one that no one's going to have any expectation for. And I know I can't fail. And it ended up being PR leader at the time, which I guess had been vacant for 2 or 3 years or something. And I just kind of ran with that thing. I started trying to get our events in local magazines. It just kind of compounded. But like I said, when I commit to doing something, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And then that led me to being recruited to do VP of Communications the following year. And then from there, I was asked to become president-elect, and I was like, whoa, I said yes to everything. I don't know about this president-elect thing yet. And if it weren't for it being specifically Cynthia Hovorka who asked me, and kind of the relationship she and I had built over the course of 2 years prior to that, I probably would not have done it. But everything happens in its perfect timing. And at that point, that I guess was meant to happen. So
I feel like the organization owes a big thank you to Cynthia Hovorka for bringing you into the fold. Can you give some words of advice for students, or really for any member, on leveraging IIDA toward their career, toward their personal life, even, right? Because IIDA isn't just one thing; it's a 180 kind of a relationship. Can you give some advice, maybe for students and professionals who are wondering about how can they leverage IIDA in their IIDA experience?
Mm-hmm. So the wonderful thing about IIDA is you can meet people who are friends, you can meet people who become vendors, you can meet people who become potential employers, you can meet people who become colleagues, you can meet people who just decide they like you and want to recommend you to do something. All of that exists in one place. I don't know any other place that you can find that all wrapped up in a nice bow. But you have to be actively engaged. And when I say actively engaged, you have to be involved on the chapter level, whether it's through one of the event committees, whether it's through being part of the chapter board. But what happens is, without you consciously recognizing it, you're honing your leadership skills. And before you know it, you are a leader, and you didn't even know how you became a leader, because all you were doing was kind of responding to a need within the chapter. And I think a lot of young designers might make the mistake where they're like, especially if they're at a larger firm, they get so engrossed in that larger firm, because in a larger firm, you can create a cocoon there. You don't need to branch out. But the truth is, what if that larger firm is not where you're supposed to be for the rest of your career? You'll never know that, because you've kind of done everything within that larger firm. And you didn't say, let me branch out and network outside of the organization that I work for. So I would say, young designers, I know you're trying to make a name for yourself when you get into your firms, but sometimes that name gets a louder voice on the outside when you're doing things like being involved with the IIDA, because others outside of your organization see you and might elevate you to certain things from a leadership perspective, more so than the firm that hired you, because the firm that hired you sees you as a baby that they have to groom. Oh. So I had that conversation with so many young designers when I was specifically at Gensler, because Gensler is self-sustaining. You literally don't have to leave the office, and you can get everything you need there, but there is something to being actively engaged with people outside of the firm that you work with.
Yeah, IIDA amplifies your community and your career. That's a great example. Thank you for that, Ronnie. You have been such a tireless advocate for young designers and a tireless advocate for mentoring. What role has mentoring really played for either you being a mentor or for you encouraging others and supporting others in their careers? So this is our mentoring moment. Let's talk a little bit about mentoring. And I want to add in there also, who are your allies? Who have you had champion and support you? Mentorship and allyship are slightly different. So let's talk about both of those.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So from a mentorship perspective, I think I've never approached someone and specifically said, will you be my mentor? Right? I kind of just nag a little bit on the side, ask questions. And if the person's willing to respond, somehow they unofficially become my mentor without me specifically having to say the words. I remember doing that with you. I remember doing that with several other people within the industry that just unofficially like sewed into me that allowed me to kind of grow in a capacity that I didn't even imagine that I could grow that, in my mind, that quickly, to be quite honest. And so in knowing what you and others did for me in that way, and even going to the two designers who picked up the phone and talked to me when I was just cold calling and looking for information, I know someone did that for me, so I have an obligation to do that for somebody else. And so whether it's officially mentoring through the IIDA mentorship program, which I've done several times, or just unofficially allowing someone to ask me questions, and I kind of take them under my wings, whether it's I work with them or I don't work with them. But because so much has been given to me, I just feel that responsibility to give it that way. But once again, don't ever ask me to be your mentor. It will naturally happen if you're inquisitive and you ask, and I want to sow into people in that way.
Yeah,
So
I think that's great advice, Ronnie, and I think important for a lot of particularly young designers and students to hear that mentorship doesn't always have to be formal,
yeah,
that it can evolve and it can be a bit organic. And if the person you're approaching is open to it and you're open to it, those relationships can evolve over time. What about allyship? In this moment that we're, I'm sort of separating this out. There's this moment that we're living through, but for many of us, particularly women of color, we've always lived through this moment where we've been the first or the only or the different in the room at the table. Where have you found allyship? And you've been both on the design side and on the client side. So talk a little bit about how you, where you have found support and allyship in the work that you've done.
Ironically, I'm going to go back to grad school because I had a unique moment of allyship that occurred through my graduate student advisor, Dr. Lisa Waxman, at the time. So without these buzzwords that we hear now, we know now, right? I just remember our first week or two in grad school, the new graduate students who came into the program, there were 12 of us. And there were actually 2 of us who were African-American, which in my mind, I thought I was going to be the only one. So it was kind of nice that Monica was there alongside me too. But I remember Lisa, Dr. Waxman asking us a specific question about what is it that you want to know about this? What's the most important thing to you about this industry? Something to that effect. And I just remember thinking, well, I said to her, where do you find the people of color? Something to that effect. And, she did stumble on the answer a bit, but I will give her a lot of credit because without me even knowing that that resonated with her, a whole year and a half later, I'm about to graduate from the program. And she comes back from an IIDA conference where I guess she spoke to you or met you. And she comes back and she's like, ha, I met Cheryl Durst and I told her about you. And I said, oh, okay. She didn't tell me. And here's the student in me, right? I was so focused on being a student. I looked up who Cheryl Durst is, and I see Cheryl Durst is the CEO of IIDA, but I don't really look up Cheryl Durst. I never find a picture of Cheryl Durst, right? Just know, okay. So obviously I connect with you and your executive assistant, and you guys carve out 15 minutes for me during NeoCon of 2006. I'll always remember. And I show up to your office and I'm just sitting there waiting for you to walk in. And then you walk in, and I'm like, okay, Lisa, I get it. I was really confused. It was why she was forcing the issue so much, but she made a point not to tell me why and allowed me to experience it. And I'm so forever grateful to Lisa and everything that she has done from an ally perspective. But that's, to me, the definition of being an ally, because you heard something and maybe you stumbled, maybe you didn't have the answer immediately, but it didn't go on lost ears, and you found a way a whole year and a half later when I totally forgot about that conversation to bring it all to light. So to me, that's true allyship.
She's Dr. Lisa Waxman is amazing, and I remember her telling me about you, and it was just such an incredible moment. And then when I finally got to meet you, I remember that look on your face. And then all of a sudden, you have that wonderful moment of kind of kinship and recognition. And so it's been such an honor and pleasure for me to be participatory in your kind of wonderful career trajectory. So thank you, Lisa Waxman. I hope you're watching this. So talk a bit about that. We'll make that leap, Ronnie, around representation. And right over the last year and a half, all of us have been on a lot of panels and in a lot of presentations and talking about how representation is critical in our industry as we're looking at creating a more diverse industry and a more inclusive, right? I can't say diversity without saying inclusion, because we need that belongingness and that welcoming aspect of our industry. But talk a little bit about representation and why it matters so critically now and always.
Mm-hmm. I think it's hard to dream if you don't see yourself reflected in that potential dream, if that makes any sense, right? So this world that's created, right, whether it's your career world, whether it's your personal world, if you don't see certain examples of people who look like you in those worlds, it's almost like you cower a little bit, because you're like, oh, well, I don't really belong there. But then the moment you see someone who, they could probably be so different, vastly different from you, but just looking at someone and seeing, oh, well, they're here. How did they get here? If they could do it, maybe I can do it. I thought this was this thing, kind of going back to grad school again, when I thought I was going to be the only one. In my mind, I said, I'm the only one going to be in this incoming graduate class. And out of 12, there were 2 of us who were actually African American. And I just remember thinking to myself, well, who did she see that made her believe that she wanted and could do this? And I hope that we're getting closer to the point where that doesn't seem like such a far-fetched dream, that it doesn't seem so far-fetched that you're like, I have to create the blueprint on how to do this thing, right? And for those out there who've kind of led the way for so many years, silently and quietly, kind of just keeping their heads down because they don't want to rock the boat too much. They made it, but they know that if there's one misstep, that might mean the next person doesn't get to make it. And so I think hopefully what the past year has done is literally shed a light on that. So number one, that burden doesn't have to sit so heavy on the ones who kind of led that way and led that path. And then it gives the opportunity to see yourselves reflected in all areas of the industry, right? Because yes, there's interior design, a thing that brings us all together. But there's so many aspects of this industry. And fine, we have Black designers, that's great. But do we have Black firm owners? Do we have Black leaders within non-Black firms? Do we have, representation from an industry standpoint and those who represent the industry that services us? From a manufacturer standpoint, there's so many branches of this thing that's called the A&D industry, and wanting to see variety reflected, not just from skin tone too, because I think the piece that I've learned over the past year is diversity is not just race or your ethnic background. There's so many layers to what it means to be diverse, whether it's socioeconomic ability, whether it's physical ability. There's so many aspects of what the word diversity means. And so when you start to focus on the inclusion and equity side of things, that's when everything else presents itself. And it's not just this thing of, how do I look?
Right.
You know?
Right.